The promise of a new life can sometimes be a death sentence whispered in public. For Anneliese Schmidt, her long, dusty journey ended not with a wedding kiss, but with a single word from a doctor that sealed her fate. Pregnant. Her groom, a man of supposed wealth named Bartholomew Finch, didn't just reject her. He crucified her in the town square, casting her out shamed, penniless, and carrying a secret she thought she'd left buried 6 feet under back in Ohio. Alone in the harsh wilderness, her only hope would come from a place she never expected. A wounded stranger, an outcast whose silent code of honor would shatter everything the civilized world had taught her. This is the story of how a brutal rejection forged an unbreakable family in the heart of an unforgiving land. The stagecoach bucked into Obsidian Ridge under a sun that wanted to cook the hope right out of the sky. For Anneliese Schmidt, every jolt was like a period at the end of a long, desperate sentence. She clutched a worn photograph of a man with a severe face and a neat mustache, Mr. Bartholomew Finch. His letters promised a fine house, respect, a future clean of the shadows she was running from. But Obsidian Ridge wasn't a town. It was a fresh wound carved into the dirt. A single dusty street, raw timber buildings squinting in the glare, saloon, general store, and then a looming 2-story house with fresh white paint that screamed money. The Finch residence. It stood apart, an arrogant island of prosperity in a sea of grit. A man matching the photo stood on the porch, stiff as a fence post. Beside him, a woman with a face like a clenched fist, Mrs. Gable, the town's high priestess of gossip, here to inspect the mail-order goods. "Miss Schmidt, I presume?" Bartholomew said. His voice was smoother than his letters, but colder too. He didn't offer a hand, just waved her up the steps. Anneliese, tired down to her soul, managed a curtsy. "Mr. Finch, it is an honor." The inside of the house was a slap in the face. Polished mahogany, velvet curtains, a grandfather clock ticking like a judge's gavel. It was a gilded cage, and Anneliese could already feel the lock turning. Mrs. Gable circled her like a vulture, her eyes picking apart Anneliese's worn dress, the frayed cuffs, the dust in the seams. "She's a bit pale, Bartholomew, and thin, scarcely strong enough for frontier life." Finch looked her over like a horse he was considering buying. "She will suffice. She is comely enough, and her letters suggest a docile temperament." But the journey had taken more than just her energy. The nausea, the dizzy spells she'd blamed on the rocking coach, suddenly boiled over. The room tilted. The clock's ticking became a roar. She grabbed for a chair, her knuckles turning white as the world went black. She woke up on a velvet sofa, the sharp smell of ammonia in her nostrils. A portly, kind-eyed man was leaning over her, Doc Hemlock. Finch and Mrs. Gable stood by the fireplace, looking impatient and suspicious. "Just a simple faint," the doctor said, patting her hand. "The journey is arduous. Let me just check your vitals." His examination was gentle. He listened to her heart, checked her pulse. Then, his brow furrowed. His experienced hands gently pressed on her abdomen. He stopped. His kind eyes filled with a deep, profound pity. He straightened up slowly, looking at Finch. "Mr. Finch," Doc Hemlock began, his voice low, "perhaps we could speak in private." "Nonsense!" Finch snapped. "Whatever ails her is my business now. Speak plainly." The doctor took a deep breath, his gaze falling back on Anneliese. "Miss Schmidt," he said, and the world stopped turning. "There's no easy way to say this. You are with child. I'd estimate you're into your 4th month." The silence that followed was heavier than a tombstone. Mrs. Gable gasped, her hand flying to her mouth like a startled bird. Anneliese felt the blood drain from her face. It was the one secret she had prayed to keep buried, the last tragic piece of a love lost and a promise broken. But it was Bartholomew Finch's face that told the real story. The thin layer of civility didn't just crack, it shattered, revealing something monstrous underneath. His eyes burned with a pure, venomous rage. "Get her out!" he hissed, the words like shards of glass. "Bartholomew, please," Anneliese whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "I can explain. My fiancé, there was an accident." "Explain?" He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "You dare speak of explanations? You are a harlot, a deceitful fallen woman who came here under false pretenses to foist another man's bastard upon me. He strode over to her, his face a mask of disgust. He didn't hit her. He just pointed a trembling finger at the door, which was somehow worse. Mrs. Gable, see that this creature is removed from my property. Her trunk is to be thrown into the street after her. She is not to be given shelter. She is not to be given a single crumb of bread. I want this town to understand what happens to those who attempt to defraud Bartholomew Finch. Mrs. Gable, energized by the scandal, grabbed Annalise's arm with shocking strength. Weak and reeling, Annalise was dragged from the house, down the steps, and shoved into the unforgiving dust. Her small trunk landed beside her with a splintering crack. Her few meager dresses, a Bible, and the photo of the smiling young man now buried in Ohio spilled out for all to see. The townspeople, drawn by the noise, just stared. Their faces were a mix of curiosity and cold judgment. Annalise Schmidt, the mail-order bride, had been rejected. She was alone, exposed, a pariah before she'd even spent a single night in town. The golden cage had opened only to throw her to the wolves. The sun bled across the western sky, and the shadows of the buildings stretched out like accusing fingers. Annalise gathered her things, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp the worn fabric. The stairs of the town felt like a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. No one spoke. No one helped. Mr. Finch's word was law. She had nowhere to go. The journey back was impossible. The hotel would refuse her. The church would offer sermons, not sanctuary. Her shame was a cloak she couldn't take off. With the last shred of her dignity, she dragged her broken trunk to the edge of town, past the last ramshackle houses. The blacksmith's hammer rang out, each clang like a nail in her coffin. The world opened up into a brutal landscape of rock and scrub. The wind picked up, howling a mournful song. A storm was coming. Dark clouds boiled on the horizon, moving with a terrifying speed. A flash of lightning lit up a structure she hadn't seen before, tucked into a ravine. It was an old line shack, abandoned and dilapidated. Its roof sagged, the door hung from a single hinge, but it was shelter. As the first fat drops of rain began to fall, cold and hard, she scrambled down the rocky slope. The door groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a single dark room that smelled of dust, rot, and something else. Something metallic and feral. She stumbled inside just as the sky ripped open, the rain coming down in a deafening sheet. In the gloom, her eyes adjusted. A rough table, an overturned chair, a cold fireplace, and in the far corner, a pile of dirty blankets. A low groan came from the pile. Annalise froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was not alone. The blankets shifted. A man sat up, his movements slow and pained. In the dim light, she couldn't make out his features. Then a brilliant fork of lightning bleached the world white for a split second, and she saw him clearly. He was Native American. His hair was long and black, matted with dirt and dried blood. His face was lean and sharp but twisted in pain. His buckskin shirt was torn and soaked with blood from a vicious wound in his side. He was feverish, his eyes glazed with delirium. He stared at her not with anger, but with the primal confusion of a cornered animal. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through Annalise's despair. All the campfire stories, the whispers of savage raids flooded her mind. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. Her first instinct was to run, back into the storm, back into nothing, but she stopped. She looked at him, really looked at him, and she didn't see a monster. She saw a fellow creature in agony. His skin was slick with sweat, his breathing ragged and shallow. He was an outcast, just like her. He was bleeding, and she was broken. He was dying in this forgotten shack, and she was dying on the main street of Obsidian Ridge. Their worlds were different, but their circumstances felt terrifyingly the same. A spark of compassion she thought had been extinguished stirred in her chest. Her own troubles fell away, replaced by an urgent, undeniable need to act. He was a human being, and he was suffering. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice lost in the roar of the storm. He didn't answer, just grunted in pain as he tried to shift. Annalise set her jaw. Her father was a country doctor. She had watched him set bones and stitch wounds more times than she could count. She wasn't helpless. She ripped a long strip from the hem of her finest petticoat, the one she'd saved for her wedding. The irony was a bitter pill, but there was no time for it. She approached him slowly, her hands held out. Let me help you. The bleeding. He watched her, his dark eyes tracking every move, suspicion warring with the fever. When she knelt beside him, he flinched but didn't pull away. She gently peeled back the torn buckskin. The wound was deep and ragged, angry and inflamed. Working by the flashes of lightning, she did what she could. She used another strip of her petticoat, soaked in rainwater dripping through the roof, to clean the wound. He bore the pain with a stoicism that stunned her, his only reaction a tightening of his jaw. She packed the wound with the cleanest cloth she had and bound it tight. When she was done, she sat back on her heels, exhausted. The man's breathing was still labored, but it had eased. He slumped back, his eyes closing. A fragile, unspoken truce was forged in the storm. Two outcasts, a disgraced woman and a wounded warrior, bound by the universal languages of pain and compassion. The world had cast them both out. In the darkness, they had only each other. The storm broke with the dawn, leaving the air washed clean. Inside the shack, a fragile peace held. Annalise hadn't slept, keeping vigil, bathing the stranger's forehead with cool rainwater. He drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering in a language she didn't understand. For 3 days, this was their rhythm. She tended his wound, changed the crude bandages, and forced sips of water between his cracked lips. The few biscuits and dried meat in her trunk were all they had. She rationed it, giving him the larger share. He was a big man. He needed strength to heal. On the fourth morning, she woke to find him watching her. The delirium was gone, replaced by a keen, intelligent awareness. The fever had broken. He was weak, but he was lucid. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a low, rough rasp. Annalise jumped. "My name is Annalise Schmidt." He considered this for a long moment. "This is a dangerous place for a woman alone." "I am aware," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. He pushed himself up, gritting his teeth against the pain. He looked at the clean white bandage, the remnants of her wedding petticoat, and then back at her. "You helped me," he stated. It wasn't a question, it was a fact. "You were unwell," she replied. "My name is Kaylin," he said, finally offering a piece of himself. And just like that, their strange cohabitation was sealed. Annalise and Kaylin. Two names in an empty world. Their conversations were spare, their silence functional. They were two people focused on one thing: survival. As Kaylin's strength returned, a new routine formed. He was a man of immense capability. He would disappear for hours, moving with a ghost-like silence, and return with a rabbit or quail, which he'd prepare with practiced skill. Annalise, in turn, took charge of their makeshift home. She found a rusty bucket for water, gathered firewood, cooked the meat he provided, and meticulously mended their torn clothes. One evening, as she was sewing his shirt, Kaylin watched her. Her belly was beginning to swell, the curve now unmistakable. "The child's father?" he asked, his tone neutral. Annalise's hands stilled. "His name was Robert. We were to be married." She didn't look up. "He worked on the railroad. There was a blasting accident." She took a shaky breath. "His family. They were not kind. They said I had shamed them. I had no one else. Coming west seemed like the only way to give my baby a life." Kaylin said nothing. He didn't offer pity or false comfort. He just listened. And in his quiet acceptance, Annalise felt more solace than she had in months. He saw her not as a sinner, but as a survivor. He understood. Meanwhile, Bartholomew Finch was tying up loose ends. His public humiliation of Annalise had been a calculated display of power. He controlled the town's only well, its largest mining claim, its freight company. Obsidian Ridge was his kingdom. He sent one of his hired guns, a mean-eyed man named Jasper, to patrol the outskirts of town, to make sure the fallen woman had moved on. Jasper found her tracks leading to the ravine. He saw the faint wisp of smoke from the shack's chimney. He reported back to Finch. Finch stroked his mustache, a cruel smile on his lips. "A squatter, living in filth. The elements will take care of her. See that no one from town offers her aid. Remind them who signs their credit slips at the general store." The threat was clear. Anyone who helped Annalise Schmidt would face his wrath. Her isolation was to be a slow, lingering death sentence. But Finch hadn't accounted for Kaylin. Word of Annalise's survival trickled back into town like poison. Jasper made sure everyone knew the mail-order bride was holed up in the old line shack with a savage. The town's reaction was a cold, collective shunning. Mrs. Gable called it divine judgment. The Reverend preached a fiery sermon on the wages of sin. But beneath the surface, tiny seeds of doubt were sprouting. Doc Hemlock felt a gnawing guilt. He had pronounced the verdict that condemned her. He knew the danger she was in. Late one night, he packed a small bag with herbs, laudanum, and precious quinine. He rode to the edge of the ravine and left the bundle by a lightning-scarred juniper tree, where someone gathering wood might find it. It was a small rebellion, a balm for his conscience. In the Gilded Spur saloon, a woman named Maeve polished glasses and listened. Maeve had seen her share of hardship, and she didn't believe for a second that Annalise was the viper Finch claimed. She heard the cruel jokes from men like Jasper, and her heart hardened. Each night she began leaving a small bowl of stew or a half loaf of bread near the back door, hoping a stray dog or a desperate woman might find it. Annalise and Kaylin knew nothing of these secret kindnesses. Their world was the shack and the daily struggle. But Kaylin knew he couldn't hunt in the area forever. He needed to trade for salt, flour, a real needle. He traveled to a trading post a day's ride away, a place where no one asked questions. While he waited for the trader, he stood in the shadows of the porch, listening. That's when he heard it. Two men, fresh from Obsidian Ridge. "Can you believe that Finch fellow?" one said. "Runs that town like his own personal kingdom. Publicly shames his mail-order bride, throws her out pregnant, and forbids anyone from helping her." The other man nodded. "Heard she's shacked up with some wild Indian out in the rocks. Finch is courting Henrietta Sterling now, old man Sterling's daughter, merging his mining interests with Sterling's railroad money. Can't have a pregnant cast-off tarnishing his reputation." Kaylin's face was a mask, but a cold fire ignited in his chest. This wasn't a spontaneous act of anger. It was a calculated political move. Annalise was a pawn sacrificed for Finch's ambition. But then the men said something that made the world stand still. They mentioned the name of Finch's claim, the Black Creek Mine. The name hit Kaylin like a physical blow. For months, he had been tracking a ghost. The man whose mine had poisoned the water upstream, sickening his people, forcing them to abandon their ancestral lands. The man he had sworn an oath to find. His quest for vengeance and Annalise's struggle for survival had just collided. He now understood. The monster who had destroyed his past was the very same man trying to destroy her future. He finished his trade, his mind racing. On his way back, he found the tracks of Doc Hemlock's horse. He followed them to the juniper tree and found the canvas bag of medicine. He returned to the shack and placed the bag before Annalise. Her eyes widened. "Where did this come from?" she whispered. "There are those in the town who have a conscience," Kaylin said. "It just runs quieter than their fear." Annalise clutched the bag, tears of gratitude on her cheeks. It wasn't just medicine. It was a message. They were not entirely alone, but they both knew Finch's fury was a storm that had not yet broken. The first snows of winter came early, dusting the mesas and bringing a wind that sliced through the walls of the shack. Annalise, now heavy with child, spent her days patching the chinks in the logs with mud and grass. Their world had shrunk to the size of their small shelter and the quiet presence of one another. One afternoon, as she stirred a thin rabbit stew, a sharp, debilitating pain seized her. It stole her breath. She cried out, dropping the spoon. Kaylin was inside in 3 long strides, his face a mask of concern. "The baby?" she gasped as another wave hit her. "It's too soon." But the baby had its own schedule. The pains came faster, stronger. Panic began to set in. She was miles from a doctor, with only a man who knew nothing of childbirth. Kaylin, however, was a rock. This was a life-or-death struggle, and that was familiar territory. His calm was an anchor in her sea of fear. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice low and steady, like the wind through the pines. Slow, steady. The labor was long and brutal. Annalise's world narrowed to the crushing contractions and Kaylin's constant presence. He held her hand, his grip firm and unwavering. He spoke to her not with empty platitudes, but with observations of the natural world. "The hawk does not fear the updraft," he murmured as a vicious contraction crested. "It uses the wind to climb higher. Use this pain. It is bringing your child. Hours bled into a nightmarish eternity. Annalise was exhausted, her strength failing. I can't, she sobbed. I can't do it. Kalen leaned close, his dark eyes intense, demanding. Yes, you can, he said, his voice cutting through her despair. You crossed a continent alone. You survived the judgment of lesser men. You saved my life. You are stronger than anyone in that town. Now you will bring this child into the world. His belief in her became her own. With a final raw-throated scream that seemed to tear her in two, the baby was born. For a terrifying moment, there was only silence. Then, a thin, wavering cry filled the shack. A cry of defiance. It was a boy, small but perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and clenched fists. Kalen gently cleaned the infant and wrapped him in the softest deerskin, laying him in Annalise's arms. Tears of pain were replaced by tears of fierce, overwhelming love. He was real. They had survived. The small cabin was no longer a shelter. It was a home. I have no name for him, Annalise whispered. Kalen stood beside her, looking at the tiny, red-faced infant. In the stories of my people, he said softly, and in yours, the lion is a creature of courage, of strength. He looks small, but his spirit is loud. He paused. Leo. Annalise tested the name. Leo. It was perfect, a name for a fighter. Then Kalen did something that stunned her. He reached out and gently touched the baby's cheek with one finger. A look of profound tenderness and fierce possession crossed his features. He is your son, Annalise, he said softly. Then he looked from the baby to her, his gaze unwavering, sealing a vow more sacred than any spoken in a church. He is our son, he corrected. I am his father. Let no man ever say otherwise. He wasn't just offering a name. He was claiming them. He was declaring himself the protector of this tiny, fragile family. A father not by blood, but by honor. The birth of the child did not stay secret for long. Jasper, on one of his patrols, saw the tiny clothes Annalise had hung to dry. He galloped back to town, bursting into Finch's office. She's whelped, he announced with a cruel grin. The harlot and the savage have a brat. Finch's teacup rattled in its saucer. The news was a loose thread in the perfect tapestry he was weaving. His courtship of Henrietta Sterling was proceeding splendidly. The last thing he needed was a living, breathing reminder of the scandal he considered buried. Her survival, and now the child's, felt like a personal affront. This cannot stand, Finch hissed. It reflects poorly on me. It suggests I was unable to manage a simple domestic matter. But it was more than just his bruised ego. Annalise Schmidt was a link to a past he had worked so hard to erase. The story she had told Kalen was true, but incomplete. Her fiancé, Robert, wasn't just a railroad worker. He was a junior partner in an engineering firm, a brilliant young man, and he had been Bartholomew Finch's business rival. They had competed for the same lucrative bridge contract, a contract Robert, through sheer skill, was poised to win. But Robert had discovered something else. He had found proof that Finch's existing mine, the Black Creek Mine, was cutting corners, using cheap chemicals that were poisoning the river downstream. The same river Kalen's people relied on. Robert was going to expose him. So Finch arranged a tragic accident, a faulty fuse, a premature detonation. It wasn't just about winning a contract. It was about silencing a whistleblower. With Robert gone, Finch got the contract and built his empire. Months later, seeing Annalise's name in a mail-order bride catalog was a bolt of malevolent inspiration. To bring his dead rival's grieving, pregnant fiancée west, only to publicly destroy her, was the ultimate victory. It was about eradicating the very last piece of Robert's legacy. Her resilience, her survival with the help of an Apache outcast, an outcast whose life he had also ruined, was an infuriating epilogue to his perfect crime. Jasper, Finch said, his eyes gleaming with cold reptilian light. Gather a few of the boys. We are going to evict some squatters from my property. The line shack sits on the edge of my claim. It is a matter of law. And the woman? The kid? Jasper asked, his hand drifting to his pistol. They are trespassers, Finch replied, the implicit violence hanging in the air. How you remove them is a matter of discretion. They rode out as the sun was low, casting long, menacing shadows. They found Kalen outside the shack sharpening a knife. He saw them coming and rose, the knife held loosely at his side. He stood between the riders and the cabin door, a silent, immovable guardian. Annalise appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Leo clutched to her chest. "Finch," Kalen said, his voice flat. "Savage," Finch sneered. "I am here to reclaim my property. You and this harlot have 10 minutes to disappear. If you are still here, my men will remove you by force." "This is not your land," Kalen stated calmly. "It belongs to no one and everyone." Finch laughed, an ugly sound. "Possession is the only law that matters out here, and I possess everything as far as the eye can see." He turned his cruel gaze on Annalise. "Did you ever wonder why I chose you, my dear? Out of all the pathetic women in that little book? It was your name. Fiancé of the late Robert. A pity about his accident. He was clumsy, but his clumsiness made me a very rich man. He found something in my mind he shouldn't have, and he paid the price." Annalise stared, comprehension dawning in a wave of sickening horror. It hadn't been random. This monstrous cruelty had all been planned. He hadn't just rejected her. He had hunted her. You killed him," she whispered. "I merely removed an obstacle," Finch said with a shrug, "just as I am about to remove another. I brought you here to be a ghost, but you insisted on surviving. A terrible inconvenience." He nodded to Jasper. "Time's up." Jasper and 2 other men dismounted, spreading out, drawing their pistols. The clicks of the hammers being cocked echoed in the tense silence. But Kalen was not a man who waited. As Jasper took his first step, Kalen moved. With a flick of his wrist, he threw the skinning knife. The blade buried itself deep in the thigh of the man on the right, who screamed and fell, his pistol firing harmlessly into the sky. In the same motion, Kalen lunged not at Jasper, but at the horses, slapping the rump of Finch's stallion. The horse reared violently, throwing Finch from the saddle into an undignified heap. The balance of power had shifted in less than 5 seconds. The scene shattered into chaos. Jasper, his smug confidence gone, raised his pistol, trying to draw a bead on the blur of motion that was Kalen. Annalise, standing in the doorway, felt a surge of pure, primal adrenaline. This wasn't the timid woman from the stagecoach. This was a mother protecting her young. Her eyes darted to the cast iron skillet near the fire pit. She lunged, grabbing its heavy handle and slinging it with all her might. The skillet spun through the air, striking Jasper's gun hand with a sickening crunch of bone. His pistol flew from his grasp as he howled in pain. Kalen saw the opening. He moved past the stunned man and delivered a hard, precise blow to the side of Jasper's jaw. Jasper's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into the dust. The third hired man, a young buck paid to intimidate, not to fight, saw his 2 companions neutralized in seconds. He looked at the screaming man on the ground, the unconscious Jasper, and the silent, deadly figure of Kalen turning towards him. Terror won out. He scrambled onto his horse and fled back toward town. Bartholomew Finch struggled to his feet, his fine suit ruined. The facade of the untouchable patriarch had been violently stripped away. His face was a mask of apoplectic fury. All his life, money had bent the world to his will. This defiance was unthinkable. "Insolent animals!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. He fumbled inside his coat, his hand emerging with a small pearl-handled derringer. A coward's last resort. "I will kill you all! I'll burn this shack to the ground with your bastards' bones inside it!" He raised the small pistol, but he didn't aim it at Kalen. In a final act of supreme cruelty, he aimed it squarely at Annalise and the tiny, innocent bundle she held in her arms. For Finch, the true insult was her survival. It was the child, the living legacy of the man he had murdered, that he needed to erase. Annalise froze, instinctively turning to shield Leo. Kalen started to move, but he was too far away. The world seemed to slow, stretching into a horrifying eternity. A single sharp crack echoed through the ravine. It was not the pop of Finch's derringer. It was the powerful report of a rifle. Finch's pistol was violently knocked from his hand, spinning through the air. He cried out, staring at his stinging, empty hand in disbelief. At the top of the ravine, silhouetted against the fading sky, were 2 figures on horseback. The first was Sheriff Brody, his face a grim mask, a shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. Beside him sat Doc Hemlock, a smoking hunting rifle held steady in his hands. It was the doctor, the quiet man of healing, who had fired the shot. That's enough, Bartholomew, the sheriff called out, his voice carrying an iron authority that had been absent for far too long. It's over. Finch spun around, his face a mess of confusion and betrayal. Brody, what is the meaning of this? That savage attacked me. Arrest them! I'm afraid not, Doc Hemlock said, his own voice ringing with a newfound strength. He and the sheriff had followed Finch from town, the doctor's conscience screaming that this wasn't about law, but about annihilation. We came over the ridge just as you were making your confession. We heard every word. About a young engineer named Robert. About an accident back in Ohio. About why you brought this poor woman all the way out here to be a trophy in your sick game. The sounds of the confrontation had drawn others. Peeking over the edge of the ravine were the faces of Obsidian Ridge. Maeve from the saloon was there, her arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Gustav, the blacksmith, stood with his wife, his huge hands clenched into fists. And at the forefront was Mrs. Gable, her mouth agape, her face a canvas of utter shock. The man she had championed as the pillar of their community was a murderer. Her entire world was crumbling. Finch saw them. He saw the judgment and disgust where fear and deference had once lived. His kingdom, built on lies and threats, was dissolving like sand. He was no longer a king. He was just a cornered snake. With a desperate cry, he lunged for the pistol Jasper had dropped. But Kalen was on him in an instant, pinning the sputtering, defeated man to the ground with an ease that highlighted the pathetic nature of his struggle. Sheriff Brody clambered down the incline and snapped the cold steel of handcuffs around Finch's wrists. The metallic click was the loudest sound in the world, a definitive end to Finch's reign. As Sheriff Brody hauled Finch to his feet and began the long, ignominious march back to town, a profound silence fell over the ravine. Annalise stood in the doorway, clutching Leo, the tears she had held back for months finally tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. They were tears of a relief so immense it was physically painful. Slowly, Doc Hemlock approached, his hat in his hands. Miss Schmidt, he began, his voice thick with genuine remorse. Words are inadequate. My silence made me complicit. For my part in this, and on behalf of a town that let fear rule its conscience, I am truly and deeply sorry. Annalise could only nod, her throat too tight for words. Maeve was next. She came forward and gently placed a thick wool blanket over Annalise's shoulders. No woman should be alone at a time like this, she said softly. Then came Gustav, the blacksmith. He stood before Kalen, looking not at a savage, but at a warrior who had defended the helpless. This shack ain't fit for a family, Gustav stated, his voice a low rumble. Winter's coming on proper. Me and the boys will see to it. In the weeks that followed, the ravine became a place not of exile, but of construction. Gustav led a small army of volunteers. The sounds of hammers and saws filled the air. They laid a new floor, replaced the crumbling walls with sturdy pine logs, and built a proper stone chimney. Kalen worked alongside them, his quiet competence earning him a silent respect that slowly blossomed into genuine admiration. They were rebuilding more than a shack. They were rebuilding the town's broken honor. Annalise, in turn, fed them. She was no longer the outcast, but the quiet center of the community's atonement. She watched as Leo was passed from the gentle hands of the blacksmith's wife to the awkward hold of a grizzled old prospector. Her son would not grow up in shame. He would be raised by a village that was learning how to be a community again. Months later, the house was finished. It was no longer a shack, but a snug, warm cabin filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke. One evening, as the first stars appeared, Annalise stood with Kalen by the window, watching their son sleeping in a cradle Gustav had carved. I used to dream of a fine, grand house, Annalise said softly, leaning her head against Kalen's shoulder. I thought that was what a home was. A cage made of gold is still a cage, Kalen replied, his arm wrapping around her. This is a home, she whispered, her heart full. We built this. She looked up at him, her love for this quiet, honorable man shining in her eyes. He will grow up knowing what a father truly is. He will have your strength, your courage. And your heart, Annalise, Kalen said, his voice soft but firm, which is stronger than any stone in this land. He will need both. They stood together in the comfortable silence, two survivors thrown away by the world, only to find everything they needed in each other. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song. But inside the small cabin, bathed in the warm light of the fire, a family was safe. In a place that had offered them only rejection, they had built their own redemption. Annalise and Kaylin's story reminds us that family isn't always about the blood you share, but about the bonds you forge in the fire of adversity. It proves that true character is not measured by wealth or status, but by compassion in the face of cruelty. Their journey from shunned outcast to the heart of a healing community is a testament to the idea that a home is not a place you find, but something you build from the broken pieces of a life you thought was over. With courage and honor, they rewrote their own destinies, creating a legacy of love for their son, Leo. If their powerful story of survival, honor, and the creation of an unlikely family moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story where true justice prevails, and be sure to subscribe for more unforgettable tales. Your support allows us to continue bringing these incredible stories to life. Thank you for listening.